Bore da, good afternoon, Fraser, and welcome to this special Cydrannu session today, which is focusing on recruiting and retaining talent within commercial and procurement teams across the public sector in Wales. For those of you who may be new to Cyd or our knowledge sharing series of webinars, Cydrannu, my name is Warren Smith, and I'm one of the subject matter experts on the Cyd delivery team. I'm delighted to chair today's discussion with an excellent cadre of expert panellists, and I'm going to ask each of them to briefly introduce themselves, only in the order that I see them on the screen. So, Helen, if you could go first, please.
I'm Helen Rees, Head of Procurement and Contracting at Mid and West Wales Fire Service.
Thank you. Steve?
Yeah, hi everybody. Steve Robinson, Head of Procurement for Ardal, which is a partnership of 4 local authorities: Cardiff Council, Monmouthshire, Torfaen and the Vale of Glamorgan.
Thanks, Steve. And Scott?
Pram da, Scott Parfitt from Prifysgol Nghymru, the University of South Wales, and I am the procurement subject lead at South Wales Business School.
Brilliant, thanks, Scott. And Catherine, thanks for joining us. Just asking you to briefly introduce yourself.
Apologies, the joys of technology. So I'm Catherine Lund. I'm Procurement Director at USW, a colleague of Scott. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you, Catherine. Thank you, panelists. If any members of the audience have any questions, then please use the chat facility, and you can ask those in English and or Welsh, and we'll aim to respond to these as we progress through the session. So just a bit of context setting for our first question. There's a sense among public sector recruiters that we're all fishing in the same pond when it comes to talent, but this pond isn't really getting bigger. So organizations end up competing with each other. Helen, I'm going to come to you first because you very kindly wrote about your challenges and experiences in your very excellent Cyd blog post titled, "How do you tackle the burning pyre when the pool runs dry?" Helen, so to get us started, can you elaborate on the different approaches that you're taking to attract and retain talent in your team?
Yes, certainly. We're a very small team. Up until about 3 years ago, we were only 3. We made a business case to have an additional post, but unfortunately, we were only allowed to make it a temporary post for the initial 1-year term, and having to evaluate then at the end of that term whether the post had delivered what we had hoped. When we went out to the market to try and find somebody to fill the post, we went out 4 times actually before we had any joy. Before going out the 4th time, originally my thinking was that we'd want somebody, because we're such a small team, we don't really have time to do some hand-holding, as it would be, if somebody wasn't actually experienced in procurement. So we were looking for somebody who either was SIPS qualified already or willing to, either on half doing the course or willing to commit to doing SIPS. We didn't get any joy when we went out to the market with that job description. So on the 4th occasion, it took a bit of a rethink really to think what would be the best option for us in terms of getting the best opportunity of getting a person that would suit our team. So I made the decision then to not make SIPS a mandatory criteria for applying for the job. And we actually had an internal applicant from our finance team. And when we were interviewing people, we still hadn't had anybody that I would have considered the perfect person to hire. So I made the decision at the time to give opportunity to this person internally. I was thinking they've already got a background knowledge of the service. They've built relationships with people across the service area in their previous role. And even though I knew it would take a lot of time and effort to train them up, it was more a case of being able to mold somebody to make them into what you want them to be. And sometimes that thinking is better than somebody who has prior experience, because then you can actually train them in the mode that you want them to operate, because all organizations operate differently. And within our service, we are a very sort of SME friendly organization. And even though we are a very small team, we do like to mentor people to develop themselves. Fortunately, this lady started with us, and then we found out about the Welsh Government programme for SIPS training. So 3 years later, she will now be qualifying in October this year. So we found that to be much, much better. On the third time we advertised, we did give somebody the role, but unfortunately it didn't work out. They were somebody who had retired actually back in 2015, had a lot of procurement knowledge, but they'd retired even before the PCR regulations came in. So they didn't have up-to-date knowledge. So for us, it's thinking outside the box and making the effort, investing time in training somebody up internally.
Very good, Helen. Thank you. And so, Steve and Catherine, I just want to come to you to see how Helen's challenges and experience and how they resonate with your own respective efforts. So, Steve, if you could come in first.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, we're fortunate to have a large team. Obviously supporting the 4 local authorities, plus a number of collaborative frameworks. But to be honest, our challenge has been probably managing several vacancies at any one time. Although I can't say we're absolutely flush with cash. Actually our issue hasn't been really about getting funding for posts, but it's really been about being able to recruit into those. But I guess this is something that it's been a long-term approach for us. So over the last 10 years, we've been running the student placement program with the University of South Wales. And so we usually take on 2 to 3 students each year. And to be honest, that's really been critical for us in terms of bringing new talent, I guess, into the procurement team. And interestingly, okay, we do have quite a few young members of the team, but also what's interesting is we have brought in a few people who've for example, have worked in the military or worked elsewhere and have taken the decision to kind of retrain within procurement. And so, yeah, that's really kind of been critical for us. And I think we've been quite successful at developing that kind of pool of talent, because we also have recruited some entry-level staff, a little bit like Helen, I guess. We've really looked for people with a kind of broader kind of skill set that we're looking for, rather than specifically. I think one of our new starters had previously worked as a chef. So yeah, as long as they can kind of demonstrate a skill set and a passion for what we do, then we're keen on that. But it does obviously put a big onus on the team to support the development of those. I think where we're struggling in particular then is attracting people at our kind of what we would call our grade 7, grade 9 level, which is our more experienced team. Because yeah, I mean, certainly we're constantly out recruiting. But yeah, we do find that with probably the exception of one appointment we've made in the last 3 years, all of our appointments have been internal into those kind of middle and more senior level roles.
Thanks, Steve. Great. The chef has come attracted towards your organisation. Catherine, what about yourself?
So I guess I'm in a slightly different place from both Helen and Steve. So I joined USW 4 years ago, and in that time, the structure that I've put in place has trebled the size of the team. But that doesn't mean that it's fully resourced. We are still with a mix of permanent team members and interims, simply because even if you can't recruit, the work doesn't stop. So I found quite quickly that I needed to look at the grading of the role and the job title. So we were out for procurement officers, and we just weren't attracting the skill set that I needed. So I put a business case in to regrade the role, following some of the language and some of the job descriptions that we have in the wider university. And actually, yes, it's not a massive amount of increase on salary, but it's enough to open the door to some other candidates, to a skill set that we didn't have. Sadly, I haven't been able to bring in a more junior element of the team. I've needed people that can hit the ground running, whether private or public sector. That is an aspiration, but I needed people that can turn the dial, that know what procurement is and how to run a tender. You can learn public procurement in that sense, but only now, with perhaps the skill that we've got in the team, if we've been able to work with Scott to look at bringing in a student placement, and we've just appointed on that. So that's where we want to go. But as I say, we're not quite so far down the line as Helen and Steve.
Thank you, Catherine. Well, it's a nice segue to Scott. So if I can come to you next in relation to this point, you're our only panelist today that represents a source of commercial and procurement talent supply at the University of South Wales. And so what's the view of your graduates in terms of their career destinations of choice? And is the Welsh public sector top of their list?
It's difficult to provide a broad brush answer to this, because there are some students who, you know, they see certain brands out there, etc., and they want to go and work for these brands. And this has been something that's changed within the last decade through myself, Steve, Gaffael Council, NHS Shared Services, and also USW recently, and Welsh Government providing support and funding for student placements in the last 3 to 4 years. Public sector has risen up to the top, but it's been through hard work and determination. Now, I think that though probably paints a bit of a biased picture and suggests that all is rosy. The problem is, to use the open analogy of the pool isn't that big. Indigenous students coming into the University of South Wales has reduced in recent years, and I think with tuition fee going up and the cost of student loans, that's only going to be something that's going to be a further barrier. But also, if you consider supply chain courses in general across the United Kingdom at an undergraduate level, there's probably, you know, a handful of what I would say pure supply chain courses. We're very lucky that we have that, and we're SIPS accredited, but we need to be doing a lot more work. And I say we, I mean us as a profession, not just the university, on effectively going upstream to the schools and putting us as a market in the sand for the careers you can have. The exit destination for the salaries, the careers that these people can go on to is second to none. And I firmly believe that if we can get, but we have a number of barriers. The number one barrier, we're not really on the A-level curriculum. In some cases, you'll get supply chain. In some, and then what tends to happen is it's an optional module. So, and it's not just A-level curriculum, it's the, you know, the NVQ or GNVQ equivalents of that as well. And it'll be optional. And it's very difficult to get a teacher who has the knowledge of what we do within procurement, within supply chain, within operations management, within logistics, to be able to deliver those. So they will gravitate towards marketing, towards HR options, etc. Because, you know, I don't want to sound disrespectful, they're 10 a penny to find people with those skill sets, but not within procurement. It's like the world's best kept secret, you know, because if, you know, don't get me wrong, we've got plenty of case studies across our alumni of 18-year-olds who start off and then progress to have these fantastic careers. So we've got the material there. It's just we got to channel more through to create a bigger pool.
That's interesting, Scott. I think, yeah, so across the all panelists, there's certainly some systemic kind of challenges here, which requires us to think more perhaps holistically about what that means. And I think you're right, Scott, looking upstream and tapping into that I think is absolutely vital. There is a question I think we've received in the chat here. I just want to come to. It's quite interesting. I'm going to just throw it out there to see if anybody wants to answer it. But it says, anonymous attendee asking, are you looking at technology to support the procurement function if recruitment is challenging? And then there's a secondary bit asking, do you believe that AI and robotic process automation could release current resources to do the key tasks whereby technology is doing the mundane tasks? Anyone want to take that?
Yeah, well, it's almost like being written for some work we're doing at the moment, actually. So yeah, so we've just undertaken a technology review. We appointed an external company to come in and do exactly what was just said there. So the key thing for us was acknowledging the recruitment retention challenges, the challenges of the new legislation, both Procurement Act and the Social Partnership and Public Procurement Act, was really how we could use technology as more of an enabler. And certainly the technologies that we've been exploring with this organization are things like digitization, robotic process automation, you know, and also AI, both in terms of supporting us in the development of documentation, specifications, method statement questions, etc., but also in terms of supporting the evaluation as well. So it's quite interesting when you start to get into it, the kind of technologies that are already in place. So yeah, so certainly it's something that we're very focused on. It's a key focus and priority for us, the use of technology. And again, it's something we've started to talk to Welsh Government about as well, because yeah, we think, you know, we kind of need to bring procurement into the 21st century in terms of use of technology.
Thanks, Steve. I'm just going to move us on. There are other questions coming out, but we'll address those as we go through. So a bit of context for the next question is around the pandemic, which necessitated the acceleration of remote working, and now post-pandemic hybrid working has become much more commonplace. Now, Catherine, I'm going to come to you first on this, because I believe that you started your current role literally just as or around the point of lockdown starting. So, you know, hats off to you. So I'm keen to understand, how did the pandemic and the post-pandemic recovery affect your recruitment and retention strategy and approaches?
Okay, so yes, I did 8 days on campus and then worked from home for the rest of the year, which was a very strange way of learning not only a new organisation but also a brand new sector. And I think that hybrid way of working is something that USW has embraced, but also has now become commonplace for the majority of organisations, and it's an expectant from candidates. Certainly in any interview that I've done in the 4 years I've been here, you know, how much time do I need to be in the office? What's your hours of working? What's your flexibility? They're consistent themes that come out in every interview. It's high on people's agenda. And even though we're able to offer that, it's also a reason why people are looking to leave perhaps their organisations where they're being asked to go back into the office, perhaps more than they wish to. So that's a theme. We didn't start recruiting for probably the first 12, 15 months. First year of pandemic, we're working from home, was keep the wheels on, cope with what you've got, and the structure was signed off. And with my private sector hat on, my background, I'm used to doing direct recruitment, where, you know, it's on LinkedIn, it's on social media, and you get a wave of candidates coming through that, you know, don't need the involvement of any kind of agency. We had some candidates come through. I found myself doing, and fully happy to do this, a lot of pre-application calls to understand the role, understand the, you know, that hybrid working. I even had a call with a chap in South Africa, which makes flexible working quite challenging. How often did he need to be in Treforest? Okay. So, you know, from that point of view, the plethora, the range of candidates wasn't there. We met some lovely people, but with the officer role out in the marketplace, that didn't work. So we went down the agency route, and we've built some strong relationships with those agencies who've got to know me, got to know us, got to know the way that we work. But what I would say is that the caliber, sometimes it's not even caliber, the broad range of skills that I'm looking for isn't readily available, whether through agency or direct recruitment. I think more and more we're finding that people are very focused on, I know this and I want to leave because I'm not getting X, Y, and Z. So from that point of view, that's quite a challenge. I'm just thinking about the rest of the question. In terms of other things that have come out from my experience in the last couple of years, we have had candidates apply and you think they're joining us, and then they get a counter offer. The reasons that they were planning on leaving, and so you were, you know, part of their recruitment approach, suddenly have disappeared, either with a counter offer or because something has changed. That's great for them, but it means that you're back to square one and you've got to go back to basics. So I think, yeah, that's really my observations of how pandemic and post-pandemic has affected us.
Thank you, Catherine. And Helen and Steve, keen to hear your reflections on Catherine's own points and experiences there. So Helen, if you could come in first, please.
Yes, I think we've had similar experiences to Catherine in terms of candidate expectations. They have really high expectations in terms of home working. And as an organisation, we've embraced hybrid working as well. So we're in the office 3 days, working from home 2, but that doesn't seem to be sufficient for new candidates. We had an applicant from India who expected to be able to work from home permanently with no interaction with the rest of the team. Obviously, that wouldn't work. So it's very similar, really. I just think people's expectations in general these days, regardless of COVID even, are much higher than it used to be when, you know, somebody in my generation was looking for work. And it's really difficult then to recruit. And as Catherine said, we do have occasions here where people have said they're going to leave. You know, and luckily the organisation has realised how valuable they are as an asset and offered them a pay increase or changes in terms and conditions. So we are trying our best as an organisation to hold on to the staff that we have got.
Thanks, Helen. And Steve, can I bring you in there on that?
Yeah, I mean, to be honest, I mean, to be honest, we haven't really had that joy in terms of recruiting, more experienced procurement officers, where we might even be prepared to consider them working from further afield. I suppose the one positive of that, though, it does mean that we have recruited, both permanently and on shorter term contracts, a number of people new to procurement from within the South East Wales region. So I think that's probably one of the positive, and often from, I guess, backgrounds, maybe people who've never been to university, they're maybe first for their generation, for their family. So we think so that's the one positive, is that challenge of trying to recruit into more senior roles is then we've continually had to kind of keep trying to bring people through into our, I guess, our entry level pool to grow and develop those. I think the key things of the pandemic, though, I suppose for us has been one on retention, because what we found is it kind of worked against us, because as soon as our people get good experience levels, we know they're being targeted by recruitment agencies, and we know those are for opportunities across the Southwest. So whereas before a job opportunity in Bristol they'd have been put off by having to commute every day, often they're only required in 1 or 2 days a week, if that. So certainly we think that's kind of worked against us a little bit. And I think the other challenge is, I mean, we as an authorities, we've embraced hybrid working, but I think the challenge for us then is having such a young team and so many new people coming through. And I think we found this with our student placements as well, is that the kind of development has been a little bit slower, because people are not always in the office with that opportunity to listen into conversations, ask the silly question because it's just somebody sat next to them. So I think those are things, and we've had to try and kind of react to that. And so we do require some of our newer staff to be in the office a little bit more, just so they can kind of to sort of support their development. So but I think without a doubt, yeah, for us, the kind of whole recruitment retention environment has kind of completely changed post-pandemic.
The serendipity of those water cooler moments that you can't replace that on Teams, really, can you? Thanks, Steve. And Scott, I just want to come to you to hear what your graduates are saying about non-salary benefits that are likely to attract them towards their career destinations of choice.
I think it's important to realise here that there's a maturity within the career progression, and much of what Steve has just said, I'm going to echo. But early on in a career, it's important, and I encourage this with the student placements, that they're in the office as frequently as possible. And this is something that the senior members, the more established members of the procurement team, need to realise, that they have to give back, they have to generate, they have to develop and nurture this talent, particularly in the onboarding phase, the first 6 to 8 months, whilst they're getting up to speed on this. There's nothing more frustrating than seeing somebody on a red light on Teams and you need to speak to them. And the tacit knowledge that is lost, as you mentioned, by the water fountain, or just simply listening to a commercial conversation between colleagues in a room, is invaluable. And I fear that we're going through a new set of rules, regulations, etc., and the training, that's going to take a lot longer now than what it would have going back a couple of years ago. Now, in terms of some other benefits, so moving away from the remote working aspect of that, the graduates that we have at USW, and I guess by the nature of the partners who we work with, we only work with mature procurement functions, and they see the benefits of that because there's this connectivity now. I get lost between cohorts because as soon as they go into the workplace, they're connected vertically then with the alumni who are years above them. So it all becomes a little bit of a blurb to me. But one of the things that they're looking for with these employers is they know if they go into Cardiff, Gaffael, NHS, etc., that they're going to get exposure to running what we would have said OJUs or threshold level tenders, to running new innovative techniques like DPFs when they first come out. And they realize this is gold nuggets for their CV. And so they're not looking to go into procurement functions that are less mature and reactive. They want to be working in the best because they realize that by putting 3 to 4 years in these organizations, that their career progression would be absolutely huge. And we are seeing a number of the graduates then move on. Unfortunately, seems to be over the bridge. And I think that's down to, although Catherine's done a sterling job, may I add, with us in getting regraded, but there's this resistance of actually Wales getting on board with the actual current pay rates, because the central government don't seem to have an issue. They're paying massive money. Okay, granted, they've done stuff and been a bit creative with the pension, but that pond or pool that we're fishing in, it's not an equal pool. And then within Wales, I would comfortably say we're a grade band behind everyone else. And then with remote working, we got people going to work in the smoke in the city, but with Welsh cost of living, but London wages. And that's one thing. It's not just London wages either. It's big central government departments with paying probably, just taking one example I'm familiar, probably £20,000 more for a similar type of jobs. And often when I speak to these people, they say, actually, we're not doing the level of procurement we were when we were in our previous roles.
Interesting insights. I'm conscious that there are some questions coming in. I'm going to propose that we cover these as we wrap up towards the end, but I just want to move us on to the next segment of the panel discussion, where we've heard some interesting challenges and around the constraints that people are working within, but that'd be great to dive into some potential solutions. So one thing around collaborative and community-based approaches, which are central to the KEED model, it encourages commercial and procurement practitioners to share their experiences and learn from each other. And Steve, just wanted to reference your work with Ardal, the procurement service run by Cardiff Council. That's a collaborative partnership between Monmouthshire, Tulfane and the Vale of Glamorgan. And it's through, you've mentioned already that there's award-winning frameworks and that these are available throughout the South East Wales region. And your drive is to maximise Ardal's positive economic, social, environmental and cultural wellbeing impact. So drawing on your experience and the lessons learned from Ardal, how do you think KEED could build on these to collaboratively increase the capacity within our profession so that the whole public sector in Wales could benefit?
Yeah, I mean, I guess the key point really is the fact that resources across the Welsh public sector are limited, and I think, sure, if Welsh government colleagues are on the call as well, they would probably absolutely echo that. And just picking up on Scott's point, I mean, UK government, yeah, they've completely changed the terms and conditions now for commercial staff because they knew that was the only way they were going to recruit people, so I think we accept that isn't just a limitation for any one sector. I think it's a challenge across the Welsh public sector. And I think obviously we've got, significant legislative changes we were talking about earlier coming through in terms of the Procurement Act, Social Partnership and Public Procurement Act. And so kind of for us, I think it's kind of more important than ever that we find ways to collaborate and work collectively together. And I know I keep banging on about this, and I know there'll be other colleagues on the call who are the same, but it's all about how we take that legislation and policy and put it into practice. Yeah, that's because, you know, even just from a local government point of view, we're kind of at risk of doing it 22 different ways, or all going through the same thought process to try and do that. Now, I guess a key driver behind establishing ARDL from our partners' perspective when they first approached us was really around how are we going to respond to the legislative changes, to the well-being agenda, because it's, you know, it's where's the capacity to start trying to decipher legislation, policy, look at current practice, and look to try and see, okay, what changes are needed in practice, in education, training, as well as the capability of the team. So this is absolutely kind of a key focus for us, and I think so certainly for the four authorities, that's what, you know. So for example, if we're thinking about how we're going to tackle climate change, and start to embed consideration of carbon reduction within our planning process, well, we don't need to do that 4 different ways. You know, what we're trying to do is think, okay, how do we best do this? And then how do we kind of look to embed that? So obviously a key thing for us then is aligning and standardizing, having a consistent approach across the 4. But I think the important thing for us isn't just certainly from, you know, because obviously I chair the WRGA National Procurement Network, but I think for us this is although that's an example of where we're trying to collaborate to try and make the best use of resources, for me this is much broader than that. So through the network, through the regional groups that we've got within local government, we are trying to see how we can collectively address some of these challenges. So for example, and I just give an example, the South East Wales delivery group that we've got, which is chaired by Ian Evans from Caffael, we've set ourselves the task to look at some of the real challenging areas we've got, such as carbon reduction. And a simple thing like how do we consistently, and we're working on a regional basis to do this across the 10 local authorities, how do we consistently implement the requirement for carbon reduction plans in our tenders? Now that sounds like it's really simple, doesn't it? But believe me, when you get into the devil in the detail, it's not. It would be okay if our market was super mature and everybody had a carbon reduction plan, but we know that's not where our markets are at. So I think trying to look at the practical solutions to how we can take the legislation and the policy and turn it into practice, for me, that's so we're not all sat there scratching our heads separate to each other trying to figure out how to do it, but we kind of collectively do it together, but very much with the practitioners head on. And part of that has got to be reflective of the fact that we have got limited resources. We've probably, and it's a terrible thing to say, but we've probably got a lower level overall of experience and knowledge. So we are developing resources. And it was just picking up, I mean, and that's why for me, I mean, picking up on the question that was asked earlier around technology, where's technology coming in and playing a key role here? Because we absolutely, for me, that's critical, you know, that, you know, things like AI, RPA, etc. We really need to kind of embrace that to see how that can deliver solutions and tools to us that actually try to help make a practitioner's life that kind of little bit easier.
Thanks, Steve. That's a great experience that you shared there, and I think absolutely right. There's a number of questions coming in, which we'll get to, which talk to some of your points that you've made as well. But I just want to come to the other panelists to see if anybody by asking the question about what needs to be done to create a cross-Wales pipeline for public sector, commercial and procurement talent. So does anybody want to come in on that?
I'd like to re-emphasize the points earlier in terms of us actively getting out upstream into the schools, but also back in 2013 with the homegrown talent, which was run by Ginter Costera, which was extremely successful, and we were the education provider for that, which took recent graduates in too. We've given the SIPS training and brought them up to speed, and many of those are still involved in Welsh public sector. I think also there's an opportunity for us to change the landscape. So the procurement and supply chain students from my course, they all get jobs way before graduation. But that's not the case for all courses. Not all courses are equal. And we're seeing the traditional, should we say then, gold-plated degrees of law and accounting, they are struggling to get these, whether it's the training courses or etc. at the firms. But these are graduates that we could help convert into a career in procurement. So I think that we could be looking at, converting, if you like, then people who come in with different original destination of where they were going to work and saying, have you considered this? And we see within the commercial space of people who've got a legal background or an accounting background and then fallen into procurement. Instead of them falling in, let's capture them because they want jobs. So, and the other thing I think unfortunately we're seeing, Tata Steel, one of the biggest employers in South Wales. If we got gaps, we should be setting up recruitment fields to onboard some of these extremely talented people from that organisations. I know one of Steve's former colleagues and his number two come from Tata Steel, and I know Catherine's come from private sector. They're used to dealing, public sector is a restricted supply chain, but it isn't the only restricted supply chain. And buy-in is buy-in, and we can go out there and people got these commercial skill sets, and so we should be looking a little bit further and looking at some accelerator programs to help that pool get a little bit bigger.
Thanks, Scott. That's very interesting. I was keen to hear Catherine and Helen around your thoughts on a talent pipeline that spans all of Wales.
So if I just pick up on something Scott said then, so before Christmas we were approached by a history undergraduate to come into the team for just a 2-week placement to understand what we did, and we gave her a 2-week piece of work and she nailed it, absolutely flew. And if there was a way that we could bring her into the team for some further experience, she was brilliant. She had all of those soft skills, all of that capability, but that actually we'd be looking for. So to build on Scott's point there, a procurement career shouldn't just be for those that happen to have done that particular course. As he says, we should grow it out. For me, I think we need to have some sort of opportunity where instead of a member of our team saying, well, I want a development opportunity, and we might not be able to give it to them, we know what other opportunities there are in other teams that actually we could, in other organisations. Perhaps we could do a secondment opportunity. Perhaps we could do a job swap. Just something that keeps colleagues within the public sector and gives them a breadth of, a breadth of opportunity, some new skills, a different organisational position, a different culture, and then they can bring that back into you. The worst case would be that I might lose one of my team to Helen or Steve as an example, but actually it would swing both ways in that sense. So it's proactively planning somebody's development and working with other organisations within our sector to enable that, to retain the talent within the sector.
Thank you, Catherine. Helen, did you have some thoughts on that?
Yes, just to add to what Scott said about the Homegrown Talent Project, we had a trainee at the time and she's now leading the commercial capability team in Welsh Government. So I think it was a really good opportunity to give somebody a rounded experience and, make it seem interesting and challenging, not sort of, because you could lose some people along the way, because procurement can be very difficult when you're dealing with stakeholders, but to emphasize to them what the whole skill set they'll obtain by actually undertaking a procurement project, because I don't know any other career really that uses as many skill sets as we do in procurement, because we are experts in everything we have to be, because there's such a variety of tasks that we have to deal with. So I would welcome something like the Homegrown Talent Project, especially for a small organisation like us, where we don't necessarily have the budget to fund a graduate, but in terms of training somebody, that would be ideal. I would love that opportunity because I've done it a lot throughout my career within the service and outside as well.
Brilliant. Well, that gives us a very nice and beautiful segue onto the final segment of today's panel discussion, because everything is changing this year, with 2024 being a year of change across the public procurement landscape, and acutely more so in the public sector of Wales, given the interconnected changes to the procurement legislation. So, Catherine, I just wanted to come to you first on this. You've already mentioned that you've been in your current role for just over 4 years, but you've come from the private sector. And so with your experience across different sectors, how do you think public sector recruiters might encourage people with transferable skills to consider becoming commercial and procurement practitioners from outside of the profession?
So I think Scott's captured a lot of it, if I'm really honest, in his previous answer. I think, just to bring my background to life, I'm an English graduate. I started off in sales. I moved into training, product marketing, category management, and as we all do, fell into this. And whilst this has been the majority of my career, the wonderful thing about indirect procurement is it's all about relationships. It's all about soft skills. As Helen said, you have to be an expert in everything, because it's all about influence, leadership, change, innovation, bringing the outside in. That actually goes with an awful lot of other careers, other professions. So what do I think a recruitment agency or a recruiter could do? Understand with a candidate in another profession, what is it they really love about their job? What are the skills that they're great at? Where are they, that if they were to think about the next 5-10 years, which are the skills that they really want to just hone, develop, and keep working with? And actually then, as Scott says, table procurement as an opportunity, our profession. And then there's nothing like face-to-face networking. There's nothing like face-to-face events that showcase what we're doing. So case studies of individuals that have moved into procurement from another profession, recruitment fairs. You've also got opportunities for mentoring and buddying to give them the opportunity in that conversation before they might consider applying for a job. So bring it to life, make it seem tangible, but also realistic, that actually you're not gonna sink. You've got all the soft skills. We can teach you the technical stuff. That's the bit that we can teach you. If I can move from private sector into public sector, you can teach the technical stuff. So it's the soft skills that are the ones that are really, really important. That's my
Thank you, Catherine. Steve and Helen, keen to hear your reflections on these points as well.
I think personally, Warren, from my perspective, is thinking outside the box and not being so rigid. HR teams seem to traditionally be very inflexible in terms of the job application process. And there's very often when I've been scoring candidates, I've been thinking, well, that isn't a must-have for me. It's other things that I'm looking for. So I think it's being able to have freedom as a recruiter to emphasize the skills that you believe are needed and not what are sort of standard. They must have 5 GCSEs. They must be able to speak Welsh. There are a lot of things that are nice to have, but it doesn't mean because somebody's got 5 GCSEs that they've got the skills you need for your job. So it's being a bit more flexible in terms of being able to score your applicants. And, if you've gleaned something about them within the interview, that they've got really good skills in certain areas, being able to take those into account during the recruitment process.
Absolutely. Back to that, thinking outside of the box, 100%. Steve, further reflection?
Yeah, because I suppose what's happened with us, where we've found ourselves, is actually it's all about developing new talent. I say that we've only really recruited from within, and that's actually because our own people are so good. It's because we've invested in supporting their development. Which often starts with the work that Scott and I talking about potential students coming through. The individuals that we recruit in, like I say, from all sorts of backgrounds, so we, recognizing they're coming in with the right skill set that we can support development. But I guess that's probably where our focus has been, is how do we develop that pool of you know, potential talent that we can then kind of support and grow and develop. I think probably where one part of my frustration is that not enough people do that, and that's hence why they then take our talent, you know. And I guess that's where I get a little, you know, I mean, I lost 3 individuals in 1 month to UK government, you know, and just to pick up Scott's, you know, the one was £20,000 a year more. I'm not going to get, that's not going to be resolved by just doing a regrade on a post. You know, we're operating in a completely different place in terms of pay and terms and conditions. The only other thing that we haven't mentioned at all today, just to mention, is apprenticeships as well. So I mean, Welsh government have now got their new apprenticeship scheme. So certainly, not, I don't want to upset Scott by thinking we'll still take your 2 students a year, Scott, but I think we're very keen to explore that and how that might work for us as well, because you know, I think, but again, I suppose that's because our focus over a number of years has been on how we develop and grow our own talent. I think the challenge for us then really is more how we then retain that talent as they progress through the organization.
Great, thanks, Steve. And I just want to come back to you, Scott. You've mentioned it already, but if you could just elaborate on what steps educational institutions could or should be making to ensure that they're helping their graduates prepare for a rewarding commercial and procurement career in the Welsh public sector, given the changes to the legislation.
I think it's mindful to remember that our courses in the main aren't public sector. So we have to consider a range of skill sets. We're not a deep dive. We're not badged as a public sector. There's not the demand there for that. Don't get me wrong, we have had programmes direct with Welsh Government over the years where there's been cohorts of public sector, and obviously they've been tailored more. But we are producing a rounded graduate who may have a career in public sector, but equally may have a career in private sector. That said, USW is well positioned as being one of, you know, like I said, one of the few undergraduate courses in terms of a pure supply chain degree. So we have a higher representation of procurement and supply chain related modules. To give Cardiff credit as well, they have a very good representation in the postgraduate space as well. But in terms of what we're doing at USW, I can't comment on other institutions, but a number of our staff, we're undertaking the procurement training, just like all the other procurement professionals in Wales at the moment. We're signed up to it. In addition to that, we're also on our carbon training. So we're constantly trying to evolve and keep in touch. And by having partnerships with such of the people on the panel here is invaluable for us. It acts as a very good temperature gauge for me to keep my finger on that pulse, so to speak, so that we are producing graduates that industry want. The one thing I would say on that is that we can only do so much. We do, and the one thing I would encourage all industry to do is to get involved with your local universities, get sandwich year placements on board, and take them into the business, because we can't do it on our own. We have these sandboxes within university where there's challenge-based learning, etc. But them going out and working and having that experience it's hugely invaluable. And also, it's a great chance for you guys to try before you buy.
Nice. Okay, I'm going to wrap up the questions to the panelists now, because we've got quite a few questions from the audience, which I hope to get through as many of them as we can, but we'll capture them where we can't, and perhaps we'll do some kind of follow-up afterwards. So I'm going to the first question in the order that came in. Our organisation is working in an agile way, so kind of home and office, but where's that quite there? But still 8:30 to 5 or 9 to 5 or whatever. So is it true flexibility, just to work when you like or where you like, but still within a kind of a fixed period of time? Does anyone want to come to that?
With us, we've just changed our flexible working policy. Actually, our HR team have reviewed it. We used to have core hours between 9:30 and 4. They were the key core hours of flexible working. There are no core hours now. You can take your lunch break whenever time you want. And we can record our time between 7 a.m. and 7 p.m. So there is more flexibility, but it's not as flexible as, you know, being able to work any time of day. It has to be within those hours, but there is more room for flexibility there.
So I'll build on that. So we're fully flexible, certainly for my team. So it's about the work you do, not necessarily how you do it in that sense. So if I give an example, I've got some members of my team who will work early on in the morning, and then we'll finish slightly earlier in the afternoon in order to do the school run. I do the school run, look after my daughter after school, and then I do a couple of hours in the evening to catch up, because that works for me. So we have, as a team, but also as an organisation, we do operate flexibly, and I think to be able to offer that is really important. You know, we all have a life outside work. We're all trying to make it work and make it balanced, so that but retaining that work-life balance as well. So that's us.
Thank you, Catherine. Did you want to come in on that at all, Steve?
Well, just echo the same. I mean, I've got 3 young children, so work-life balance is important. And I think it's you know, and it's interesting when you think about it. I can remember pre-pandemic, if people weren't in the office, they weren't working. I mean, God, how well, I believe how our views have changed. I think people who don't work at home are people who probably didn't used to work in the office either. But you know, I think we've seen the way the team almost seamlessly moved to hybrid working, you know, during pandemic, and the way that's evolved coming back. Yeah, I mean, you know, I think it's a flexibility that works for us. And yeah, but a bit like the other, you know, we've got broader core hours that people can work within, albeit I think people do tend, unless they've got reasons why they want a bit of flexibility, then I think people tend to work to those core hours. But yeah, I agree with the other panelists.
Thanks, Steve. I'm going to come on to the next question, because this refers to some points that Scott, you've made. Panel members have referred to skills regularly and the right skills. What does this look like for the future of public procurement, and where are the gaps? And then there's a follow-on bit about how further education and higher education could support this. Does anybody want to come in on that? Future of procurement.
I know Helen is well versed in procurement skills, and has undertaken a couple of publications on this that she did share on LinkedIn. What I would say is that there's, when you look at it, it's so diverse in terms of what's being asked, and in terms of what's out there. You know, and again, what is procurement, what is supply chain, what is logistics, and the skill sets there. We undertake it regularly as a dissertation topic area, but some of the things I would say in terms of the future skills coming on board, I would say analytics, being able to analyze data and being able to process data is going to be critical, along with all the soft skills as well. And I think when you read the press and you think about, you know, Generation Z coming through, and, you know, they like to do everything in an online environment, I think being able to manage stakeholders, face-to-face interaction. I know I sometimes have some students who, when they have to take a live telephone call in work, for the first time, that they struggle with that, because they're used to having that lead, that lag. And I think part of it's the pressure of, oh, if I get it right, if I get it wrong. But I think we have to accept, you know, sometimes we don't know the answers, and being able to manage that is critical. But yeah, I would say that there's a change in landscape, I would say, around the technology aspects of that, data analytics, with the green skills, you know, in terms of how we become carbon neutral by 2030, 40 and 50 respectively, is going to be playing a massive role across our careers, as well as maintaining cost quality, is the typical things that we've been, you know, within the space and the guardians of, if you like.
Thanks, Scott. There's a question from Ruth Jones, the only non-anonymous panelist. Questions coming from Ruth. I think we have touched on this, Ruth, if you're still with us, about does the panel support development of existing staff as well as new talent? I think that was a resounding yes from the panelists. So I'm just going to move on to the next question about increasing in salaries, and have the panel, oh, that's disappeared. Has the panel seen a cut in their staff budget in the last 12 months? And do they think they will have cuts in future years? Ooh.
I don't think we haven't seen a cut as such, but when you ask for an additional member of staff in our organisation, and I'm sure it's the same everywhere, you have to really work hard to get that business case right and to demonstrate what benefits that role will bring. Because as I mentioned earlier, our temporary post was only for a year. After that year, I had to submit a new paper then. And basically the aim of the post was for me to be able to let go some of the things that I was doing before to focus on the more strategic things. And when I was able to demonstrate that, you know, they were willing to actually invest and provide us that post on a permanent basis. So it's getting the evidence afterwards, monitoring what's happened during that temporary period. And if you can demonstrate fully what benefits we've received, that, you know, they're very supportive of making temporary roles permanent or adding members to the team.
Thanks, Helen. I'm going to just direct some questions towards specific panelists now. There's a question around collaboration, it being a talking point or discussion point for many years now. But what's needed that's different to like the efforts of the past? So, Steve, if you could just elaborate on that with particular perhaps reference to Ardal.
Yeah, I still think collaboration more broadly is a challenge. You know, I think, you know, Warren, that's part of the reason Keed is here, you know, so, you know, so I absolutely think that's got a key role to play. I think, I mean, obviously with something like the Ardal partnership, I mean, that I guess is kind of taken it a step further, because it's, you know, our team is responsible for addressing some of those practice changes. You know, we're responsible for that, so it's kind of hands-on. I think there's collaboration where you're sharing ideas, but obviously that takes it a stage further, because it's actually, you know, pair of hands actually getting on and supporting the delivery of the work for that particular authority, which is slightly different. I think though, in terms of the wider collaboration, I still, yeah, we're not where we need to be. I would agree. Again, I think what we've tried to do with the South East Wales group, and it was a very conscious decision, is to say, well, look, you know, ultimately, you know, people like myself and other heads of procurement, we're the ones who are responsible now for introducing these changes that are required. Therefore, we kind of feel we need to kind of collectively work together a bit more to try and think about practically how we do that. So I suppose that is a slight shift. The challenge with all that though is we're incredibly busy and juggling multiple things. So and I think, and I know it's often a plea, or can you share stories? Sometimes we just don't have time to share stories. So I think it's that very, I mentioned it before, I think just very practical support is what we need. Stuff that's actually going to make our lives easier, but let's try and do it once, you know, rather than multiple authorities all trying to kind of reinvent the wheel.
Absolutely. Well, I think we'll end there. We're at time anyway. The remaining questions will probably follow up with some kind of perhaps a blog post or something after this session. But I'd just like to thank the panelists so much for contributing your time, your perspectives and your experiences during today's very engaging Cydrannu session. It's been fascinating and insightful discussion. So just, yeah, thank you all. Thank you for the participants. And keep in touch with the LinkedIn channel for any news and events and updates of the Keed service. So thank you all, and have a great rest of your day.
Cheers, thank you.